As Richard Allen's attorneys, we have received multiple requests from local and national media for interviews and comment since the unsealing of the probable cause affidavit. It would be virtually impossible to comply with these requests and continue to focus on the merits of Rick's defence. Therefore, we offer up these thoughts. We do not want to try this case in the media, and we intend to adhere to the Indiana rules of professional conduct that provide guidance on pre-trial publicity. However, the police and prosecutor's office have conducted many press conferences over the 5+ years of this investigation and following our client's arrest. On the other hand, Richard's ability to assert his innocence has been reduced to only one short post-hearing press conference. Accordingly, we feel it appropriate, necessary, and within the bounds of our rules of professional conduct to make a few comments concerning the probable cause affidavit and Richard's innocence. Richard is a 50-year-old man who has never been arrested nor accused of any crime in his entire life. He is innocent and completely confused as to why he is being charged with these crimes. The police did not contact Richard after Libby German and Abby Williams went missing. Rather, Richard contacted the police and voluntarily discussed being on the trail that day. Like many people in Delphi, Richard wanted to help any way he could. Richard contacted the police to let them know that he had walked on the trail that day, as he often did. Without Richard coming forward, the police probably would not have had any way of knowing that he was on the trail that day. Okay, so let's just cut in here briefly and I'll share my thoughts on what we've just listened to there. Now, quite naturally, the defence are going to come forward at this point in time and say, look, Richard Allen was a courteous, helpful individual. He came forward to the police at the earliest possible opportunity, and really this individual just wanted to help. He just wanted the girls to return home safely. That is the impression they're going to put out there. What we need to separate, however, is did Richard Allen feel that he needed to come forward? And I think that's the most important thing here. How did Richard Allen perceive this in his mind? Now, we know from the probable cause affidavit that he was seen. He was seen by multiple individuals on the trail that day. So in Richard Allen's mind, if he is indeed guilty of these murders, he's thinking to himself, okay, this didn't quite go as I had planned it. I was hoping to go there, find my victims, and kill them without being seen and leave the scene without any witnesses. But this clearly didn't happen, did it? He was seen by at least 3 juvenile females on the trail, and even more interestingly, he was seen by a passing motorist leaving the crime scene. Now, what I pick up upon regarding her eyewitness account is that she claims that she sees an individual, a male individual, who is both bloody and muddy. Now, if this is indeed Richard Allen fleeing the crime scene that this lady witnesses as she drives past, then she must have been fairly close to Richard Allen to make that assertion. Now, the reason that I say that is because when we take a look at what she has stated here, the male subject was wearing a blue-coloured jacket and blue jeans and was muddy and bloody. Now, if you think about the colours involved here, mud on blue, blood on blue, she must have been really close to him to be able to make that assertion. It's not like she's 50, 60, 70 feet away. He's wearing a white t-shirt, white bottoms. It's fairly evident that there's blood and mud on this individual. We're talking about a sort of mid-colour blue top and light-coloured jeans. But even still, mud and blood, you would have to be incredibly close to that person to be able to identify both of those substances on the colour blue. Now, equally, some people may say, well, maybe he had blood on his face, on his arms, on his hands. Is that what this lady saw? But again, you would need to be fairly close to an individual to be able to ascertain those two substances in general, mud and blood. You know, we're not talking about someone who was parked up stationary, who noticed something odd and thought, oh, hang on a minute, what's going on here? Keeping a close look at an individual. We're talking about someone who was a passing motorist. So every indicator that I get from her eyewitness account is that this was a fairly close encounter here with Richard Allen. And if this is indeed the case, put yourself back in the mind of Richard Allen for one moment. We don't just have the 3 juvenile females and other individuals who saw Richard Allen on the trail that day, but we also have this close encounter with a passing motorist. I think what is also worth remembering is that it's not completely uncommon for perpetrators of murder to actually insert themselves into investigations, and there can be a multitude of reasons for this, whether they just wish to gain knowledge on how the investigation is going, or whether they just want to appear innocent. You know, oh, look, I've come forward, I've given you this information, I've put myself there that day. You know, there's a multitude of reasons why an individual would have done this. Anyway, let's continue on with the following statement. Richard volunteered to meet with a conservation officer outside of the local grocery store to offer up details of his trip to the trail on the day in question. Richard tried to assist with the investigation and told the police that he did recall seeing 3 younger girls on the trail that day. His contact with the girls was brief and of little significance. Richard does not recall if this interaction with the conservation officer was tape recorded, but believes that the conservation officer scribbled notes on a notepad as Richard spoke to him. Okay, so let's just interject here very briefly. Now, when I put myself in the position of Richard Allen, assuming he is guilty for one moment, this is the best possible outcome for him here. He's not in some interview room being grilled, question after question. This is very casual, very out in the open. It's a public place. This man's taking brief details down on a notepad potentially. So this is the best possible outcome here for Richard Allen. What I am quite intrigued about though is that we haven't heard any questioning regarding the man on the bridge. Did Richard Allen admit to being the man on the bridge? I would imagine that he hasn't. So how has he accounted for that? We've got an individual who is wearing a blue jacket, blue jeans. We have Richard Allen who has said, I was on the trail that day wearing a blue jacket, blue jeans, and I had a hoodie under my jacket. Have the police actually said to him, are you the man on the bridge? We don't actually have that answer, do we? Which I do find quite interesting. So let's now continue on with the statements here. After Richard shared his information with law enforcement officials, he went back to his job at the local CVS and didn't hear from the police for more than 5 years. The next time Richard heard from the police was in October 2022. This was approximately 2 weeks before a contested sheriff's election and within days of a federal lawsuit filed against the Carroll County Sheriff's Office by its former second-in-command, Michael Thomas. In the lawsuit, Thomas claims that he, Thomas, quote, had made suggestions and offered assistance in the investigation of a high-profile child homicide investigation. But those suggestions and offers were rejected by the sheriff. Thomas further claimed that the sheriff and others in the department feared the disagreements with Thomas would become publicised as a result of the political campaign for sheriff. Thomas claims in the suit that he was ultimately demoted and replaced by Tony Liggett, who later that year won the 2022 election for sheriff. Furthermore, Thomas claims he was also removed from high-profile cases. Richard was ultimately arrested on or about October 28, 2022. In the 5+ years since Richard volunteered to provide information to the police, Richard did not get rid of his vehicle or his guns and did not throw out his clothing. He did not alter his appearance. He did not relocate himself to another community. He did what any innocent man would do and continued with his normal routine. Okay, so a few interesting little snippets there in that paragraph. He has kept hold of the vehicle, the guns, and did not throw out his clothing. Now, we can't be sure, can we, regarding the clothing, because he could have gone out and bought a different jacket, an identical jacket to the one that he was wearing that day, and he could have disposed of the one that he wore on the bridge. That is obviously assuming Richard Allen's guilt here for one moment. But they're obviously going to say this, aren't they? They're going to say, look, this is an innocent man. This person kept hold of his car, he kept hold of the gun, he kept hold of the clothing, he continued working a normal job. You could say, yes, those are the traits of an innocent man. Or equally, you could say, those are the traits of an absolute moron. I mean, it's up to you which side of the fence that you fall on regarding those two, potential suggestions. But just because he's kept all of these items, does it really mean that he is an innocent man? To me, no, obviously it doesn't. I do find this really strange, though, the fact that he's gone to this conservation officer, he's given some details, he's gone back home, he's kept hold of this gun, he's kept hold of the car. I think some people have suggested recently that Richard Allen was a brazen individual, someone who actually wanted to be caught. That's the reason he went forward or came forward to the police, because he wanted to be caught for this crime. Now, this ultimately depends on how you view this. Either you believe Richard Allen has inserted himself into this investigation, he's gone to this conservation officer because he likes the spotlight, he loves to revel in the fact that he has committed this crime, but he's sort of hoodwinking everybody. He's pulling the wool over everybody's eyes, so to speak. Either you fall on that side of the fence, or you believe, actually, he was seen by a certain amount of individuals that day, on the trail, even on the bridge itself, and also fleeing the crime scene. So is that just a panic response? He wants to tell the police that he was there because all of these people have actually seen him. They're going to be coming forward and saying, look, I saw this man covered in blood, covered in mud, I was driving my car, and it's simply a reaction out of fear from Richard Allen, in that he has called the police and said, look, I was there, I didn't see the girls. It all depends on how you view it. My own personal opinion is that this is an individual who didn't carry out this crime particularly well. Maybe the actual murders themselves were done in a clean and efficient manner, in that he didn't leave his DNA behind, but he hasn't really parked in the optimal spot to commit this crime. He's had to walk a fair distance back to his car. He hasn't decided to keep close to the tree line, most likely, to avoid passing motorists. He's been seen by other individuals prior to these murders being committed. So there's a lot of mistakes here. And he's also even potentially kept hold of the gun in which he used to subdue both Abigail and Liberty. Let's now continue on with the statement here. The probable cause affidavit seems to suggest that a single magic bullet is proof of Richard's guilt. It is a bit premature to engage in any detailed discussions regarding the veracity of this evidence until more discovery is received, but it is safe to say that the discipline of tool mark identification, ballistics, is anything but a science. The entire discipline has been under attack in courtrooms across this country as being unreliable and lacking any scientific validity. We anticipate a vigorous legal and factual challenge to any claims by the prosecution as to the reliability of its conclusions concerning the single magic bullet. Okay, so they're talking there about this unspent bullet that was found at the crime scene. As I said earlier in this video, I'm really interested if the police have actually said to Richard Allen, okay, so you're wearing blue jeans, blue jacket and a hoodie under your jacket. Are you this individual in the video here? We haven't heard that, have we? We haven't heard that neither confirmed nor denied. Now, as I said earlier, I can only imagine that if they have asked this question, that it was strongly denied. But what they're talking about here is the bullet that was found in between the two bodies of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. And clearly this is going to be a very, very hot topic of discussion during the trial. I don't believe personally that the prosecution are going to be hanging their hat necessarily on this unspent bullet. It's more of the totality of the evidence pointing at Richard Allen. The fact that we have this unspent bullet. We have independent witnesses who have stated that they see a man matching his description close to the crime scene, near the Monon High Bridge, or at least on the trails that day. The fact that Richard Allen himself has put himself there that day, even said that he was on the bridge on the day of the murders. It's going to be the totality of the evidence against Richard Allen which is his biggest issue here, not so much one smoking gun or an unspent bullet found between the two bodies. On Richard's behalf, we argue to have the PCA unsealed. Richard has nothing to hide. As importantly, we were hoping that we would receive tips that would assist us in proving up his innocence. Not surprisingly, we have been inundated with tips from a variety of sources, all of which will be vetted by our team. Although it is the burden of the prosecutor to prove Richard's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the defence team looks forward to conducting its own investigation concerning Richard's innocence. We appreciate those that have reached out to support his cause. The prosecutor mentioned at the last hearing his belief that others may have been involved in the killing, yet there was no mention in the PCA about a second suspect involved in the killing. The defence is confused by such discrepancies in the investigation and will be in a better position to respond as more discovery is received. Richard Allen owned a Ford Focus in February of 2017. His Ford Focus is not in any way similar to the distinctive look of the PT Cruiser or smart car that was described by the witnesses. It seems that the CCSD is trying to bend facts to fit their narrative. At this point in time, we have received very limited information about this case and look forward to having something more to view than that which was offered up in the sparse PCA. Okay, so now we reach the discussion regarding the vehicles. I think this is going to be a very, very hotly debated topic in the court because I have to agree with them here. A Ford Focus, to me personally, doesn't look anything like a PT Cruiser. A PT Cruiser is a very distinctive car, both back and front, and it certainly does not resemble a smart car, which is quite clearly far too small to be a Ford Focus. So I don't see the parallels here between a Ford Focus, a PT Cruiser and a smart car. And as I say, I think this will be a hotly debated topic if and when this case goes to trial. So let's finish off with the statement here. Moving forward, it is our intent to scrutinise the discovery as it is received and give the necessary attention to the volumes of tips that we are receiving. To the extent we continue to discover information that points to Richard's innocence, we will offer up this information to the public so long as we are not prohibited from doing so as a result of the recent request by the prosecutor for a gag order or by the Indiana Rules of Professional Conduct. Brad Rosie. Delphi murder suspect Richard Allen slipped through the net of law enforcement back in 2017 due to a clerical error, it has been revealed. A civilian FBI employee mislabeled or misfiled information about Mr. Allen when he was interviewed by police not long after the murders of Libby German and Abby Williams in Delphi, Indiana. As a result, Mr. Allen's name fell off the radar and the case went unsolved for more than 5 years. Finally, an investigator trawling through old files uncovered the misplaced information and the 50-year-old local man was arrested and charged with the murders in October. What happened here was some sort of clerical error or misfiling by a civilian employee of the FBI, the Murder Sheet podcast told The Independent. It was not a malicious error, just an unfortunate mistake, where a clerical error let the Richard Allen tip sink to the bottom of the whole file, essentially. And only recently, when someone was going through the old tips, they found that tip and thought, we need to follow that up. So when people ask why has it taken 5 years to loop back to Richard Allen, that's what we've learned. The Murder Sheet podcast added, it was not the result of someone calling in a tip or someone incarcerated speaking up now, but it was someone in law enforcement going through old tips and discovering information from 2017. The revelation that it was a clerical error that enabled the accused killer to walk free for more than 5 years comes after it emerged that Mr. Allen was questioned about the murders back in 2017. A redacted version of the probable cause affidavit was released on Tuesday, finally laying out what led law enforcement to the suspect. Okay, so I'm going to share my thoughts on what we've just listened to there. Now, for me personally, I don't buy into this filing idea, misfiling, clerical error, whichever you want to call it. I don't buy into that, and I'm going to tell you why. Firstly, we've had a multitude of press conferences since the murders of these two girls discussing what is going to take place if you have exhausted all avenues. Doug Carter has said on more than one occasion, once we've gone through all of the tips that we have, we're going to circle back to the beginning and we'll start all over again because we know that the missing piece of that puzzle is in there somewhere and we must have missed it. So we'll go back and we'll cover everything again. He said that on more than one occasion, even back to the earlier press conferences, he was still using that terminology. Now, the second point, and probably the more important one that I wish to make, is the fact that Richard Allen, by all accounts, gave this report to a conservation officer. This report was given shortly after the murders. Now, do you not think that at some point in time, during the last 5, almost 6 years, that conservation officer is going to come forward to at least one of his colleagues, maybe even a family member or a friend, and say, hang on a minute, what about that guy that came forward very early on? What did he look like? Well, he was white, mid-40s. Actually, come to think of it, he kind of resembled that guy on the bridge. I mean, did the conservation officer pass away or something? I don't know. I mean, I can't believe that. I can't buy into this idea that a report has been given to a conservation officer, yet over the next 5 to 6 years, that's never been mentioned again. The reason I say that is because this isn't a cold case. This hasn't been hidden from the media. We've had very high-profile press conferences concerning these murders, 2017, 2019. Surely at some point in time that conservation officer is going to go back, or at least remember what took place, remember taking that report, sharing that information with someone he worked with. It's probably also worth remembering that we're not just talking about one individual concerning this report. This conservation officer surely would have had to have passed this report on to someone else, maybe someone higher up in his department or someone else on his department. So it wouldn't have just been one individual who took down some notes and chucked it in a drawer. Surely other individuals were aware that this report was taken. And to me, hearing such a term as, clerical error, it's such a generic excuse. It's almost like, Karen didn't do the filing. Karen messed up the filing. The bloody work experience girl messed up the filing cabinet. Christ, what are we going to do? It's such a generic excuse that I can't really buy into this. I really can't. For us to believe this excuse, or this reason, I should say, then really we have to believe that many individuals simply forgot that this report existed. Not just Richard Allen, not just the conservation officer, but people who actually were aware that that report was actually taken. Now, at this point in time, we don't actually know what is contained in that report between Richard Allen and this conservation officer. But another interesting point to highlight is the fact that we had this abandoned car, didn't we, at the old CPS building. This appeared in the 2019 press conference. Anyone with any information or the driver of that vehicle, please come forward. Richard Allen claims he parked at an old Farm Bureau building, a building which never even existed. Surely that is there on the report somewhere. How did you get to the trail that day? Well, I drove my car, parked outside an old building. I think it was an old Farm Bureau building. Didn't the conservation officer realise that that building doesn't even exist? Didn't anybody who checked over that report realise that the Farm Bureau building doesn't exist? Why are they so keen to trace the driver of that vehicle when he's been there the whole entire time in your report? Did that not send alarm bells ringing in the conservation officer's mind when he hears, a vehicle parked at the old CPS building? Hang on a minute, that guy told me he parked his vehicle there. What the hell is going on with this? Something, as I've said in countless other videos, something's gone terribly wrong here, somewhere along the line. I can't believe for one moment that with all of the information that has come out, all the information that they're looking for, hasn't, for some reason, come back to that conservation officer, and he's thought to himself, hang on a minute, I did a report just shortly after these murders. A guy came forward and said he parked at this old building, an old Farm Bureau building, which doesn't exist. He resembles the man on the bridge. He's around about the same height. His voice is very similar. What the hell is going on here? I don't buy into this, as I say, this clerical error, this admin error. I mean, many people will say, well, this report may be very vague. It may simply say Richard Allen, he's 40 odd years old, medium build, he was on the bridge between these 2 times, and that's the end of it. But surely common sense should tell you that if you've got an individual who's come forward and actually put himself near the crime scene, or even walking on the bridge, he's putting himself basically there during the time that these girls were killed. Surely these reports are the ones that need to be the most thoroughly checked over. They need to be packed full of detail. Detail that can be cross-referenced and cross-examined and looked into. Not just, mid-40s male, met at the grocery store, he was there between X, Y and Z. To me, that's not what took place. Surely this is a very detailed report, or at least it should have been. And really the only way that I can see this clerical error being factual is if really the conservation officer made a mistake somewhere. Maybe he did take a very sparse report down. Maybe it was simply chucked in the back of a drawer and simply forgotten about. Either way, whatever way that you look at this, there are serious failings here. Serious failings from top to bottom. I think just the fact that Richard Allen gave this report outside of a grocery store is a massive monumental oversight in the first place. People who were there that day, people who walked the trail, individuals who walked across that bridge, particularly during the timeline that the police are interested in, the time when these murders were committed, those individuals are imperative to the earliest stages of this investigation. What they saw, what they heard, even where they walked, is incredibly important to these investigators. Yet we're led to believe that Richard Allen just strolled outside of a public grocery store. The conservation officer just took down some notes in a pocketbook. This wasn't even voice recorded. The Kleins and Richard Allen. What is the connection between these individuals, if any? A question that a lot of us have asked ourselves, particularly in recent times. So we've just got hold of the probable cause affidavit. There is a lot of discussion online regarding its contents, and in particular some of the vehicles mentioned in that document. I'm going to draw your attention to a vehicle that I believe could be connected to the Kleins, could have some relevance to the Delphi case. Let's take a look at the following paragraph here. He observed a purple PT Cruiser, or a small SUV type vehicle, parked on the south side of the old CPS building. He stated it appeared as though it was backed in as to conceal the license plate of the vehicle. Now, one of the biggest points of discussion regarding the PT Cruiser is the fact that a purple Chrysler PT Cruiser does not really in any way, shape or form resemble the vehicle driven by Richard Allen, a black Ford Focus. And people that say that, to be honest, they do have a point. A PT Cruiser is a very distinct vehicle. It's got a very distinct front and rear end. And the colour purple is quite unique, isn't it? It's not particularly common to see a purple vehicle. So naturally people are saying, well, why has that appeared in this probable cause affidavit? A purple PT Cruiser does not resemble a black Ford Focus. What the hell is going on here? Anyway, a couple of weeks ago, I should say, I got some information from somebody and they asked me to not say anything, to keep it quiet, which I have done. I'm very respectful if I ever get any sort of information. And I was told that Tony Klein's mother drove a purple PT Cruiser. And today that seems to have been confirmed again by a separate source who has come forward and said Tony Klein's mother had a picture of a purple PT Cruiser as the cover photo on her Facebook profile. So now that I've heard this news from two completely separate sources, and I've also seen a video online with my own eyes of a purple PT Cruiser parked at or very near Tony Klein's house, it doesn't seem beyond the realms of possibility that that vehicle could be involved somewhere. We also had talk, didn't we, just a little while ago, about a burn pit at Tony Klein's parents' house being investigated by law enforcement. We've had the discussion regarding Keegan Klein for some time now, discussion regarding Tony Klein, and also the prosecutor coming forward and saying, we believe others may be involved. There's other individuals out there. So are we putting the right pieces of the puzzle together when we look at this particular vehicle? Could this go to explain why the prosecutor came forward and said, look, we don't want this probable cause affidavit unsealed. We believe there's other individuals concerned here. Because when we all heard that news, when we heard those words, everybody, including myself, thought that we must be looking at other names here. There's going to be a Tony Klein in here somewhere. There's going to be a Keegan Klein. There's going to be a Bob Smith or whatever. There's going to be a multitude of different people listed in this particular document, and that is why they do not want it unsealed. But then when we had the defence for Richard Allen come forward, and they said, well, the document's quite unremarkable actually, it just lists Richard Allen, there's no other names even listed in this document. I immediately thought, okay, this guy must be telling the truth. He has seen the document, and at some point in time it's going to be released, so he's got no real reason to lie. And I really did just buy into it straight away. I thought, okay, well, we're just looking at Richard Allen here then. But was the concern of the prosecutor the mention of this unique vehicle? Not your regular everyday Ford Focus, but a very distinct vehicle, purple in colour, a PT Cruiser, Chrysler PT Cruiser, was the fact that this is classed, I would say, as a fairly unique vehicle. Were they concerned that that would tip off the person who was driving that vehicle on the day that these girls died? Now, regarding the Delphi murders, I've said for quite some time now that I do believe that there is a connection here between the Kleins and Richard Allen. Yet, every time we seem to get a little bit more information released, I do start to doubt that, and I'll be completely honest. I think with my videos, I tend to try and keep an open mind in terms of suspects and who may or may not be connected in this case. I don't just tend to hang my hat on one particular idea and try to make all the pieces of the puzzle fit. But I have to be honest here, every time we get a little bit of new information, I start to think to myself, have I got this wrong? Was this just a guy on his own? Someone who was waiting for the prime opportunity to live out his fantasy, if you will. Someone who liked hiking, who would probably hang around those kind of areas, waiting for the opportune time to strike. Is that what we're looking at here? But somewhere in the back of my mind, I cannot shake the idea or the belief that there is a connection here between the Kleins and Richard Allen. Another couple of pointers which tell me personally that we could be looking at least a couple of individuals involved here, 2, maybe 3 individuals involved in this crime, is the fact that we have these 3 juvenile females who give completely different descriptions of an individual. We've got one of these juveniles stating there was a man, he was wearing a blue jacket, a light blue jacket, light blue jeans, and another one of the group saying that she sees a male, black hoodie, black jeans, black boots. Now, as covered in a previous video, we know who likes to wear the colour black. We know that that's Keegan Kline, don't we? We know that Keegan Kline has spent a lot of time with law enforcement regarding this case, being questioned over and over again. Another reason I believe at least one individual is concerned here, possibly even at the crime scene itself, is that the picture that I have in my mind regarding this crime is that the girls crossed the creek, and at some point in time, one of those poor girls is going to be murdered. Most likely, the other individual is going to witness this. And I don't believe that's going to be an easy task, even if you have a handgun, even if you have a knife. I would imagine that if you see that happening, you would at least try and flee. No matter what happens, you would just try. And I know we're going to talk a lot about fight, flight or freeze. It could be possible that these 2 poor girls just froze and, that was the end of it. But I get the impression that it wouldn't be that easy to contain 2 individuals. It wouldn't be that easy, even if you had a weapon such as a firearm. We also had the Ron Logan document, where an FBI agent stated quite clearly that there were no defensive type wounds on the girls. They didn't try and fight back. There was no defensive type wounds, which is quite telling, at least in my mind. I get the impression that at least one of these girls was subdued or possibly even restrained. And that's not an easy task for just one individual to carry out. Restraining 2 girls, being found with no defensive type wounds. As I say, I could be wrong here, but it's just the impression that I get, that there could be at least one individual present at the crime scene itself. We also have that really long time period, over an hour, where the killer was there, maybe trying to hide the bodies or posing the bodies, whatever. We also have the talk of this CSAM ring, or individuals who would share information and indecent material. We need to bear in mind that we're talking about very small communities here. People that were into that kind of stuff may well find a way to become acquainted with each other, to find out about each other, to share their fantasies with each other. Very, very small communities that we're talking about here. But overall, I would say that the biggest potential puzzle piece in all of this regarding a connection with the Kleins and Richard Allen could very well come in the form of that PT Cruiser, the purple PT Cruiser. If it does turn out to be the case that Tony Klein's mother drove a purple Chrysler PT Cruiser. I mean, what is the likelihood of everything that we've heard so far? The podcast, the television interviews with Keegan Kline, all of the interview with that individual regarding the CSAM, the Dropbox links, his dad being involved, logging in, logging out of the Anthony Shots account, speaking to the girls, speaking to Liberty German and her friends after the murders, saying that you were supposed to meet them there that day. We can't just ignore this, surely. As I say, if it does turn out to be the case that Tony Kline's mother drove that vehicle, and we have a completely independent witness here claiming that they see a purple PT Cruiser or something which closely resembles that car, to me that is very, very telling information. One of the more popular questions surrounding the Delphi murders is the following. Was this simply a crime born out of pure opportunity, or was there some kind of meeting in place that day for Libby, Abby and a third individual? Now, my own personal belief regarding this is that we are looking at a planned meeting here, and I'll explain why. Richard Allen, according to the affidavit, was seen by 3 juvenile females. They described seeing a man wearing a light blue jacket, light blue jeans, and they were fairly close to this individual. The reason I say that is because they exchange words. One of the girls says hi, and he simply glared back at them. Now, if we put ourselves in the position of Richard Allen for one moment, maybe he had this fantasy for quite some time, he was waiting for a prime opportunity, maybe he even frequented those trails on a very regular basis. I don't believe that day was the prime opportunity. And one of the reasons that I say that is very simple, because he has already been seen, not from a distance, not from 100 feet away, but from very close range by these 3 juvenile girls. So close, in fact, that they could exchange glances, they could exchange words. I think what is also very telling regarding this partial interaction between the 3 juveniles and the man on the bridge is the fact that they describe this individual as walking with a purpose. Now, to me, that tells me he's late. He needs to be somewhere by a certain time. In my mind, if Richard Allen is in fact guilty of these double murders, in his mind, he is hoping to get to the bridge whilst Libby and Abby are already halfway across, or at least started their cross of the Monon High Bridge. So he's walking with a purpose. He knows that he needs to be somewhere by a certain time. There is a plan in place here. The second reason that I don't believe that day was the prime opportunity to commit double murder is the fact that we don't just have these 3 juvenile females who see the man on the bridge from a fairly close distance. There's also another lady who spots the man standing on the first platform on the Monon High Bridge. Now, if Richard Allen is indeed the killer of these 2 girls, then what I believe has happened is that he has got there too early, or he has walked off with a purpose, as described by the 3 juvenile females, towards the bridge. He has got there and there is no one there. So he stands out on the first platform, and one thing that Richard Allen, or the man on the bridge, doesn't have to worry about is being seen by Libby and Abby. They're expecting to meet, most likely, the Anthony Shots profile, an individual who is in their late teens. So Richard Allen being seen by the 2 girls is not a concern for him. There is also the possibility here that Richard Allen arrived at the CPS building, parked up his car and waited for a matter of around 10 minutes, maybe slightly longer, before exiting his vehicle and heading towards the Freedom Bridge. And we need to ask ourselves, if that is the case, then what is the delay here? What is the need to wait? Why would you wait in your car for 10 minutes before exiting and heading towards the bridge, the Monon High Bridge? To me, again, that could suggest that he is waiting for Abby and Libby to go on ahead to reach the bridge so that he can approach from behind. Now, equally, on the flip side of this, you could say, well, maybe he's parked up and he is preparing himself. He's getting all of his equipment together. He's steadying himself for this task. But again, if this was completely unplanned, what would be the need to park up and wait for 10 minutes? To me, it all seems to add together here. The way that this man is walking with a purpose, striding forward, he's heading somewhere. He knows exactly where he's heading, and he's got a rough idea of what time he's got to be there. And he doesn't leave his car, most likely, at the first opportunity. He's parked up there for a little while, a matter of, as I say, around 10 minutes, maybe slightly longer, before he exits the vehicle and heads to the bridge. It's almost like, in his mind, this is all planned out. He knows roughly when the girls will arrive, and he's trying to time his entrance to the bridge to coincide with that. Now, I can see a lot of people raising an alternative explanation here for this. Maybe Richard Allen, if he is indeed the man on the bridge, maybe he just didn't care. Maybe he wasn't concerned at all about who saw him that day. Maybe it wasn't even on his mind or didn't even register that he had passed those 3 juveniles, that they'd got a good look at his face and what he was wearing, his age, his clothing, how he was walking even. Maybe that just wasn't a concern of his. He wasn't worried about the lady seeing him on the bridge. Wasn't even a passing thought in his mind. He was solely focused on finding an opportunity to commit murder. What I believe counts against that is what happens post the murders of these 2 girls. Now, what we do know for a fact is that Richard Allen was not hunted down by the police straight after these murders in 2017. Richard Allen approached the police. For me, that tells me that he was concerned. He was worried that he'd been seen. He was concerned that he'd been seen by these 3 juveniles. He was concerned that he was seen fleeing the crime scene by a passing motorist. And he was most likely concerned that he was seen standing on platform 1 of the Monon High Bridge. Why else would you come forward to the police to say, I was there that day? I even crossed the bridge. Even give the exact description of what he was actually wearing. Why would you do that unless you were concerned that you had been seen? So then why not just abort it? Why not just go back to your car and drive home? The reason why he couldn't do that is because there was a meeting already planned. Today was the day, because everything was in place. He had the weaponry. He may well not have been alone that day. He may not have been the only individual concerned in these murders. All of the prior planning, the catfishing, the discussions, the luring the girls to a remote, isolated bridge with no escape. Everything had been planned. There was no backing down at this point. He had to get to the bridge as quickly, as stealthily, if you will, as he could, and the rest is history. But make no bones about it, he was concerned. After the murders, he was concerned. And that is why he approaches law enforcement, to give, as I say, the exact description of what he was wearing. Blue jacket, blue jeans. I went and stood on the first platform. I was watching the fish with my X-ray vision or whatever. He was concerned because he had been seen. If this was someone with not a care in the world, why would you do that? So now let's take a look at the possibility that this was actually just a crime of opportunity. Are there any factors in this case that point to that being likely? And actually, there are a few. Firstly, the fact that Richard Allen may well have been aware that this was a scheduled day off school for these girls. Maybe he was heading to the trail, as he did quite frequently, and he would just see who was there. And the opportunity arose. He saw Libby and Abby, he saw that there was no one else on the trail, and this was his time to live out his fantasy. Also, I find quite interesting where Richard Allen parked. Parking there at the old CPS building is not the optimal place to park if you are going to commit this crime where it was committed. The best place to have parked would have been naturally the cemetery car park or by the cemetery. So could that go to suggest that this was indeed just a crime of opportunity? I don't think walking out in the open on the north side of the road with such a fair distance to cover on foot, covered in mud and blood, is the best idea, you know? Really, if you had committed this crime, you knew where you were leading these girls across the creek to that embankment area. You would keep close to the tree line, as close as you could, all the way back as far as you could towards the CPS building, where yes, you will have to go out into the open at some stage to get back to your vehicle, but it's going to cut the risk of being seen down quite considerably. What we hear in the affidavit is an eyewitness describing an individual walking on the north side of the road, which is very telling. It's almost as if He's out in the open. So was this, as I say, just a crime of opportunity? And really what this individual needed or wanted to do most of all was get back to his car in the quickest time possible. Now, obviously we can't discount the possibility that this was indeed a planned meeting, but the murder did not go as planned, if that makes sense. What I mean by that is that we can't really discount the possibility that the girls tried to flee across the creek and he actually ended up somewhere he wasn't expecting to end up. Therefore, he headed to the nearest road or the nearest place where he could get his bearings and headed back to his vehicle. That is a distinct possibility. But with everything taken into consideration here, looking at the case as it stands right now, in December 2022, there has to be a connection here for me. There has to be a connection between the Kleins and Richard Allen. I can't see past that at this point in time. And as I've said in previous videos, I may well be very wrong when I say that, but it's just my own thoughts and just my own feelings on where we stand currently with this investigation. It's also worth remembering that we don't have probably even half of the information regarding the evidence against certain individuals. We have a very sparse affidavit that just really covers the bare bones of the evidence against Richard Allen. And so, with everything considered in its totality, I just don't believe that this was some random, unplanned, crime of opportunity. There's too much at stake here, too much risk involved. The fact that he's been seen by those 3 juvenile females from a very close distance. He's been seen by the lady even standing on the first platform of the bridge, and he's been seen fleeing the crime scene, covered in mud and blood. To me, this was someone who continued on with a course of action that was already pre-planned. And there are so many indicators here that tell us that that is the most likely scenario. We have the Anthony Shots profile communicating with Liberty German before her murders. We have the conversation with the Anthony Shots account and the friend of Liberty German saying, oh, I was supposed to meet her that day, but she didn't show up. There's too many coincidences here for me to believe that this was just some random attack and these 2 girls were just really unfortunate and they ran into the hands of a monster that day by pure chance. But I feel the 2 biggest giveaways in this particular situation regarding it being a planned murder or a planned meet for that day is the fact that, as I said earlier, that he stayed in his car for a certain amount of time before leaving. It's almost as if it has to run to a certain time schedule, or he is expecting someone to be there at a certain time. It doesn't appear, and I'll say that word again, it doesn't appear as though Richard Allen has just pulled up at the old CPS building, exited his vehicle and started walking and just looking around the trails. It would appear that he waited there for some time. Now you need to ask yourself, why would that be? Yes, it could be that he's just getting himself ready, but it could also tell us that he is running to some kind of time schedule. He has a planned meeting there that day. It could well be that he was expecting Abigail and Liberty to be there a little bit earlier. Hence the reason he was actually ahead of them, it appears, at some point in time. He then had to cross them or go past them, facing them, turn back round and trap them on the bridge. Something else that sticks out to me in the affidavit, however, is the mention of him having his phone. He said, I had my phone out. I was looking at my phone when I was walking. I believe that's what it said. And he said he was looking at a stock ticker. Is there the possibility here that he has had some kind of tip-off, some kind of word, some kind of message, I don't know, whatever, to say that the girls are on their way, or some kind of indication of where the girls were at a certain period or a certain point in time? He has hung around to wait for these girls, in my opinion. This was a planned meeting that day. So recently, concerning the Delphi murders, I came across a post online discussing Richard Allen's arrival time on the day of the murders. So I'm going to go over this person's post and share my own thoughts and theories afterwards. So it states the following here. What does Richard Allen's arrival time mean? He got to the park nearly 20 minutes before the girls, which rules out the possibility that he followed the girls there from another location. Surveillance, stalking, following is very common with this type of crime, and his arrival time doesn't rule out the idea that he surveilled or stalked them previously, but it does tell us that he didn't stalk them during the ride over, which is a crucial new detail. My understanding is the girls likely hadn't left the house yet by the time he got to the park. This could mean one of two things. Number one, it was random. He was prepared to kill, went to the park, and within 20 minutes the right circumstance presented itself. This is certainly possible, though many killers have talked about spending hours in a location waiting for the right opportunity. He showed up with a willingness to commit the crime, and almost immediately had two girls by themselves in the most isolated and inaccessible part of the trail. This location also provided quick access to an even more remote off-trail area. Or suggestion number two. He knew in advance where they were going that day and roughly when. Obviously this plays into the catfishing Klein angle, which does seem to be the highest probability scenario, in that somehow he knew their plans that day and got to the trail with just enough time to prepare and scout the general area with the knowledge they'd be arriving soon. Higher probability does not mean it must have happened this way, it just means this scenario has a higher chance of happening than a random attack that required many different moving pieces to align on their own. However, we don't know how often Richard Allen visited the park and spent time there waiting for victims. If he regularly went there with a willingness to commit this crime and spent considerable time hanging around, obviously it ups the probability that he would eventually encounter a situation like this. With the above in mind, you have to wonder if surveillance footage and witness statements were taken for the days and weeks before the murder, especially when Allen was off of work. If they discovered Richard Allen visited the park with some frequency beforehand, it suggests the location was a bigger factor than the specific targets and may have been random. Okay, so let's combine what we've just read there with a recent paragraph from Richard Allen's defence team, where they came out into the public and stated the following. The police did not contact Richard after Libby German and Abby Williams went missing. Rather, Richard contacted the police and voluntarily discussed being on the trail that day. Like many people in Delphi, Richard wanted to help in any way he could. Richard contacted the police to let them know that he had walked on the trail that day, as he often did. Without Richard coming forward, the police probably would not have any way of knowing that he was on the trail that day. So if we open up our minds to the possibility for one moment that this simply was a random attack, that everything fell into place, this was a chance encounter between these two girls and Richard Allen, if indeed he is the killer of these two girls, then is there really any evidence that could support that? What I find quite intriguing about that little passage there from the defence is that Richard Allen, according to them at least, had been there before. He knew the area. It was an area that he frequented quite often. That is what is stated there. He went there quite often. The question that should be put to Richard Allen would be, where do you usually park when you go on these hikes? When you take your car and you go for these walks at the Monon High Bridge or surrounding area, where do you usually park your car? Because where he chose to park his car on that day, as in the old CPS building, is actually quite a big factor in itself. Now, if Richard Allen came forward and said, well, usually I don't even take my car, usually I just walk straight to the trail, or usually I park a little bit closer, but on this occasion I decided to park at the old farm building, or the old CPS building as it's actually known, then quite naturally that's going to raise a few eyebrows from the investigators. And what I'm about to say next is clearly based on Richard Allen's potential guilt here when I say this. But what we need to do is look at the events and the evidence surrounding Richard Allen and this case as it stands in this very moment. If Richard Allen is indeed the perpetrator or one of the perpetrators of this terrible crime, then there are so many corners that have been cut here. So much lazy and lax behaviour from Richard Allen in terms of keeping hold of the blue jacket, keeping hold of the gun, which is by all accounts potentially connected to this unspent bullet found between the bodies of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. There's so much lax and lazy behaviour post the murders that it wouldn't surprise me if Richard Allen just told the truth and he just said, well, usually I park somewhere else, but on this occasion I decided to park here for whatever reason. The reason I say that is because he doesn't appear to be the sharpest tool in the shed. He doesn't come across as a criminal mastermind, so to speak. And the very fact that Richard Allen has come forward here and said, look, I frequent those trails. I go there very often. I'm a frequent visitor to the Monon High Bridge and the surrounding trails. It does leave the question, doesn't it? Where do you normally park your vehicle? Where do you normally leave your car when you go on those walks? What I find quite interesting regarding what we've heard so far in the Delphi murders, the press conferences, the newspaper articles, the recently released affidavit, is that we don't have anyone coming forward and really saying, well, there has been this car that's been parked there every Monday that does seem a little bit strange. Or I've seen a car parked at the old CPS building on more than one occasion in a bit of a strange way. We don't have that, do we? This appears to be a one-off occasion where people have spotted a car parked in a very peculiar manner. Another interesting point of discussion regarding Richard Allen's choice of parking location that day and how that could maybe tie in with this being an unplanned meeting that day. And what I mean by that is no prior arrangements in place to meet Abigail Williams and Liberty German. They were simply two girls that he came across that day. What could tie into that and lend that to being a possibility is the distance between the crime scene itself and Richard Allen's vehicle. Now, we're talking about a walk of almost or around about a mile here from where these two girls were killed to where Richard Allen would eventually have to walk back to his getaway vehicle. Another factor worthy of consideration is the fact that we have absolutely no idea at this point in time what Richard Allen's mental state was during that day. Was this someone who had a fantasy for some time? Maybe the urge simply became too much for this individual and he needed to do something on that particular day. What we do know of this individual, however, is that this was a family man, someone who may have had prior knowledge that the schools were off on that fateful day. So why not take a trip down to somewhere I normally walk, somewhere where I normally hike, the Monon High Bridge. I'll park my car just a little bit of a distance away as to not garner any suspicion from people closer to the trail or entering and exiting the trails. And I'll just have a little look. I'll have a little wander around. I'll take my tools of the trade with me. And if the opportunity presents itself, maybe I'll act on these impulses. So when we combine this all together, the fact that we have absolutely no idea what Richard Allen's mental state was on the day of the murders, alongside his choice of parking location, which does seem a little bit bizarre when put alongside where this crime actually took place. As I said earlier, we're talking about a walk of around a mile from where these girls were killed back to his getaway vehicle. That's not ideal for anybody. Even in the affidavit recently, there was an eyewitness that drove past an individual wearing a blue jacket, blue jeans, covered in mud and blood, which suggests to me that he was out in the open. He had to walk for quite some distance out in the open back to his getaway vehicle. And also, this was an individual by all accounts who had been to the trails before. Someone who had been there often. Had he been scouting the area, looking for potential victims, just waiting for the right time? Or, as I said earlier, did the urge just become too much on that particular day? For me personally, and my own personal opinion on this case, is that we are still looking here at a planned murder, something that took a lot of planning, a lot of preparation, and certainly involved more than one individual. Again, that's just my own personal viewpoint on that. But there just seems to be so much evidence stacked in that favour, rather than just a few sort of snippets that give you the impression that this could be a sporadic crime or a crime of opportunity. To me, the Keegan Kline angle is very credible. That Anthony Schott's communications with Liberty German prior to the murders are very interesting. And the way that Richard Allen conducted himself on the day of the murders, to me, tells me a lot. The fact that he pulls up in his car. He waits there for around 10 minutes, maybe even longer. It's almost as if he's waiting. Things have to run to a certain schedule. He's expecting someone there at a specific time. The way that these three juveniles describe Richard Allen walking toward the Monon High Bridge, walking with a purpose. To me, that's walking with intent, walking briskly, trying to get somewhere for a specific time period. It certainly doesn't appear that we're looking at an individual here who is wandering the trail aimlessly, just waiting to see if an opportunity presented itself. Every aspect of this case thus far, and obviously we only have small little snippets of detail to go by, but the impression that I get is that he was trying to get somewhere by a specific time, walking with a purpose, walking with intent, walking with his head down, hands in his pockets, trying to get somewhere by a certain time. The reason that I believe he may have stayed in his car for a considerable length of time, I think it was about 10 minutes, maybe even longer, is because he's trying to cut down the risk of eyewitnesses. He knows roughly what time the girls will arrive, so he's waiting in his car so that he's not doing exactly that, wandering the trail aimlessly, collecting more and more eyewitnesses of a man wearing a blue jacket and blue jeans. Could that be why he stayed in his car for a period of time? Murdered Delphi teens were intended victims of botched kidnap plot, cops believe, as investigators dig up dead cat to match hairs found on girls to alleged killer's pet. Right, so we're going to take a look at this recently released newspaper article concerning the Delphi murders, after which I'll share my own thoughts and feelings. Murdered Delphi teenagers Liberty German and Abigail Williams were victims of a botched kidnapping plot hatched by members of a local ring. This is just one of a host of disturbing new details and allegations, including gruesome details about how the girls died, and that police dug up the prime suspect's dead cat in an effort to match hairs found on their bodies. The revelations come just 2 weeks after authorities released a redacted version of the probable cause affidavit that led to Richard Allen's arrest. Allen, 50, was charged on 2 accounts of murder on October 28th, 5 years after 14-year-old Libby and 13-year-old Abby were found dead in Delphi, Indiana on February 13th, 2017. DailyMail.com has learned that shortly after his arrest, one of Allen's neighbours recalled seeing police digging in his yard. Now DailyMail.com has been told they were digging up the family's dead cat, whose hair proved a match for the samples found on one of the victims. Carroll County prosecutor Nicholas McClelland has openly stated that he believes Allen is not the only actor involved in this. And while Allen has not been charged with kidnapping, prosecutors have alleged he attempted it. Now sources close to the investigation have claimed that Allen was acting with at least 2 other men and was involved in a ring. Last month, DailyMail.com revealed Keegan Klein, 28, of Peru, Indiana, who is currently awaiting trial on a slew of CSAM charges, was cooperating with state police and prosecutors in a bid to reduce his own charges. Sources told DailyMail.com, quote, "The girls met Keegan Klein online and he arranged to meet them that day but didn't go. Instead, he set them up to be kidnapped for the ring." During one of several police interviews, Klein admitted to soliciting girls for nude images by catfishing them, posing as teenage girl Emily Ann or hunky actor model Anthony Schatz. It was as Schatz that he communicated with Liberty German. Chillingly, Schatz was one of the last people to communicate with the girls before they took their fateful walk on Delphi's Monon High Bridge Trail. Police interrogating Klein told him they did not believe he committed the murders, but was protecting the identity of whoever did. Now the source has revealed that Klein has cut a deal with prosecutors. Quote, "The search warrants on Allen's home and property were carried out based on Keegan's testimony." Indiana State Police Carroll County spokesman Sergeant Jeremy Peers would neither confirm nor deny any of the details when put to him. He said, quote, "Law enforcement has not released any of those details or anything beyond what is in the probable cause." The source claims that Klein, from whose devices police retrieved a slew of CSAM material, knows Allen and that the men met when they both lived in Peru, roughly 40 miles northwest of Delphi. The source also claims that both men knew Ron Logan, whom police first pegged as a suspect in the killings after the girls' bodies were found on his property some 1,400 feet from his home. An FBI search warrant served on Logan's home and property dated March 17th, 2017, revealed that on February 14th, the day after the killings, Logan asked a relative to provide him with a false alibi. He told a cousin to say that a friend had picked him up and taken him to a fish store between 2 and 2:30 p.m, and that he didn't return home until 5:30. The last time the girls were known to be alive was at 2:13 p.m, when Liberty German made a brief cell phone recording of the now infamous bridge guy approaching the girls with the words, "Guys down the hill." Logan's alibi was shown to be a lie, and text messages retrieved from his phone showed he was out of his house and in the vicinity of the murders on the evening of February 13th. The FBI document also noted Logan asked his relative to lie for him the following morning before the crimes were even discovered. Logan died at the age of 84 on January the 24th, 2022, and was never named as a suspect. But now sources have told the Daily Mail that Logan, who had a history of violence against women, was involved. According to the source, investigators believe that the plan had been for Alan to kidnap the girls and bring them to Logan's home, where he and allegedly Klein would assault them. They said, quote, "The girls were supposed to be kidnapped for the ring, but something went wrong, and he knifed and assaulted one and almost decapitated the other. Logan and Klein never met the girls." Police have been tight-lipped about the girls' cause of death, saying only that there was a lot of blood at the scene. Now the Daily Mail has been told that the murder weapon was a knife and that both girls bled out. Speaking well ahead of the probable cause affidavit's release, the source revealed that the girls were killed near the river, information since confirmed, but then moved and posed naked under a tree. The FBI search warrant served on Logan's home also included law enforcement's belief that the killer may have taken souvenirs. The DailyMail.com has been told that underwear and a cell phone were taken from the scene. The newly released probable cause affidavit also reveals that one of the girls could be heard saying the word gun. According to the source, the killer was wearing a gun on his waistband. Police recovered a Sig Sauer model P226 as well as knives from Alan's home. Alan's wife, Kathy, 50, confirmed that the weapons were his. Forensic testing of an unspent round found near the girls' bodies showed that it had been cycled through Alan's gun. According to the probable cause affidavit, even though the bullet had never been fired, it bore telltale and unique signs of having been in Alan's weapon. The affidavit states, quote, "Between October the 14th, 2022 and October the 19th, 2022, the Indiana State Police Laboratory performed an analysis on Alan's Sig Sauer model P226. The laboratory performed a physical examination and classification of the firearm, function test, barrel and overall length measurement, test firing, ammunition component characterization, microscopic comparison and NIBIN, National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. The laboratory determined the unspent rounds located within 2 feet of victim 2's body had been cycled through Richard M. Allen's Sig Sauer model P226. Allen could not explain how a bullet that had been through his gun could have ended up there. He denied ever having been on the property or having lent his gun to anybody. Allen has strenuously denied any involvement in the killings, though he admitted to police that he was on the trail on the day that the girls went missing. According to the probable cause affidavit, several youngsters saw him there ahead of the murders. His lawyers say he's simply the wrong guy. They have dismissed the probable cause affidavit as flimsy and described the forensics relating to the unspent bullet as junk science. Okay, so what are my thoughts on this rather bizarre newspaper article that's recently surfaced? I think the first thing that draws me to it, or the first thing that I want to discuss, is this talk about Richard Allen and this plan to take the girls to Logan's property. Now, my big issue with that idea is, okay, if something went wrong at some point in time and these girls were murdered, Richard Allen is covered in blood, he's covered in mud, whatever, then why didn't Richard Allen head to Ron Logan's house? Why didn't he go there to get cleaned up or change his clothes? It's a little bit, it doesn't make much sense to me that Richard Allen would bypass Ron Logan's house, walk past the cemetery, up onto that road, back towards his car, in full view of passing motorists. To me, if someone else is in on this, you're going to be knocking on their door saying something's gone terribly wrong, I need to get cleaned up, and you would be, you'd be going to that person and trying to, as I say, make yourself look presentable and making your way back to your vehicle. You wouldn't just bypass his property and head out in the open covered in mud and blood, back to your car. So to me, if there is this sort of like close-knit plan in place here with Keegan Kline, Ron Logan and Richard Allen, then why has Richard Allen not utilised Ron Logan when something has gone wrong? A secondary point of discussion, I think, has to come from this mention of a second phone. Who does that second phone belong to? I mean, is this a secret phone owned by Liberty German? Is this a phone owned by Abigail Williams? I mean, I've always been under the impression, and I could be wrong when I say this, but I've always been under the impression that Abigail Williams didn't have a phone. So who does this second phone belong to? What doesn't make any sense in regard to taking that phone from the crime scene is, okay, if they've taken a second phone away from the crime scene, then why leave Liberty German's phone there? Because we're led to believe that the phone was found relatively close to the bodies, relatively close to the crime scene, yet that phone has been left there and another phone has been taken. To me, that doesn't make much sense. I mean, this could have been something that investigators have been hiding or keeping under wraps for some time. Maybe that they class that as some kind of information that only the killer would know. But it doesn't make much sense as to why they would take that phone and yet leave the other one at the crime scene. I do also find it a little bit laughable where it states the following: speaking well ahead of the probable cause affidavit's release, the source revealed that the girls were killed near the river. Information since confirmed. Like, not being funny, we've known that for like nearly 6 years. It's not, it's not hidden information. We've known that they were killed with a knife for months. Years even. I mean, it's been discussed on other people's channel, I'm sure, since when this crime actually took place, that this was, most likely a knife attack. So the way it's worded there is just, I don't know, it's a little bit shameful, really, to be honest. Speaking well ahead of the probable cause affidavit, as if it's like, this information is factual. This has to be the truth because we were given this information before the probable cause was released. Speaking well ahead of its release. The girls were killed near the river. Wow. Who didn't know that? I mean, everybody has known that. It's just, not great, to be honest, not great. Another one of my issues regarding this being a kidnap which has gone wrong is when I read this story, the first thing that flashes into my head is, okay, if this is a kidnap that's gone wrong, then what was the need for the knife? Why did you bring the knife along with you? If you've approached these two girls, you've pulled out your weapon, they've complied, they've gone down the hill, you've got a loaded firearm in your hand. Why do you believe a knife would make someone comply more than a firearm? To me, that doesn't make any sense. The knife has been taken there to kill. It's been taken there for a specific purpose. It isn't to make someone comply with your requests. It's to do damage. It's to kill somebody. Now, my own personal belief stands as it always has, or has for quite some time, that I do believe that there is other people involved in this murder, or at least had knowledge of these murders, not just Richard Allen. I firmly believe there is a connection with Richard Allen and the Clines. But with Ron Logan, I just don't have a good sense either way. I really don't. I don't have a strong feeling towards Ron Logan, neither one way nor the other. One thing I will say though, is when you look at how all of this information has come out over the past months, the leaking or releasing of this Ron Logan document, then we had the Keegan Kline stuff, then we had the interview with Keegan Kline, which was leaked, and then we had, Keegan Kline talking to police, the search of the river, all of that combined. I just wonder if they were trying to shake Richard Allen out of his tree by releasing, or not releasing, but connecting other parts of the other parts of the triangle. Does that make sense? So if this is indeed factual, let's just imagine it is factual for one moment, that there is this triangle between Keegan Kline, Ron Logan and Richard Allen. We had the Ron Logan document released. We had all this information released out there publicly via podcast and different formats on Keegan Kline. Were they trying to shake Richard Allen out of his place? Was he the missing part? They'd already got the other two pieces of information. They knew who the third person was and they were trying to rattle him in some way. I mean, is that a possibility? I don't know. Anyway, do leave your own thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Just before I go, I've just got to mention that I have been absolutely hammered with some kind of flu for the last 5 days. I'm just starting to feel better now. So if my narration hasn't been up to its normal standard, I do apologise, but I've tried to get a video out there when I've felt able to do so. So hopefully this has come out okay. A massive thank you as always to my new viewers stateside. It's great to hear your comments, your suggestions. Do keep them coming, as I say, in the comments section below. Very shortly you'll be able to see the Delphi playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient file. Do feel free to check those out at your leisure. And I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.